You're listening to the Strategically Podcast. I'm Tyler Collins.
And I'm Brandon Collins. We like to say that strategy is all about finding the best way to get from where you are to where you want to be.
Head over to our website, Strategically, that's strategic.li, for more tools and content. But right now, you can join us for this casual conversation where we dive deep into the concepts behind thinking strategically in life, business, or whatever you care about.
In this episode, we start exploring 5 different methods for how to narrow down what your end destination should be. We'll introduce the methods and then begin talking through method 1. Let's get into it.
In this session, we're going to be talking about finding your desired future. So last week we started getting into that a little bit, but we didn't get too far into it.
We tried to get into it.
We actually got kind of hung up on some really interesting stuff about goals and goal setting, and some ways maybe that goal setting isn't always like super helpful. A lot of that was from my personal experience, but some of the feedback we heard from some of our past episodes were, maybe I know sort of what to do, but I don't know necessarily where I'm going. So I think this is going to be a really important session for us to really dig in on that, sort of deciding what that future should be that we talked about it last week. It's a vision, more of a destination. Well, maybe not destination. Yeah, destination.
Yeah.
More of a vision, less of a goal. I don't need to review.
We talked about the phrase desired future.
Yeah, we don't need to review a whole lot, but
yeah, well, and last week not last week, when our last session, we talked a lot about the importance of being clear about your desired future and taking time. It's tempting to skip over this step because it seems so, we talked about navel gazing and how people sort of resent the time they have to take before they're actually doing the thing. And so what we have today is several methods that I think it's sort of like, I don't know, maybe this is a bad example, but it's almost like a diet. Like there's lots of different diets out there. Some of them, work for some people better. Some of them work for other people better. And so I think my hope is that after we walk through some of these between I forget how many there are, like 5 or 6 methods, one of them will you'll be able to strike gold and be at least somewhat confident in the, where you land. So.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point too, this is the most important step by far. Mm-hmm. Once you have the destination down, you can go from there, and you probably don't even need us to tell you like how to do strategy if you've got a really solid destination very clearly chosen out. And we've talked about this in the past, but I feel like it's worth bringing up again. When you know where you're going, your mind has a way of focusing you towards that thing and helping you get there, because you're focused then. Every like conversation you have, every like TV show you watch, every, for me, it's like YouTube videos I watch. And when I'm thinking about something, I'm trying to figure something out, it all starts to like get connected to that thing that's sort of in the back of my mind. So
yeah.
I do think that if you've got that destination really selected and you've done that work first, you're going to get there. Now, I think a lot of what we're trying to accomplish, with this book, with this kind of content, is help you get there faster once you've really selected that destination. So all that, I'm saying all of that because there's 5 methods here, right?
I forget exactly. I'll look here.
3, 4, 5, 6.
There's 6.
6 different methods. And you might, I think you were kind of alluding to this. And so maybe I'm bringing it up to say, hey, this is worth doing 6 different times. Like if you do method 1 and maybe you're still not sure about your destination, and then you do method 2, and you're still not really sure about your destination, and so on and so forth. You keep going because this is the most important step. If you're going to put any of your time anywhere, thinking 80-20 here.
Spend extra time here.
Yeah, right? Because it's going to be the thing that probably makes the biggest difference along the way this is my destination.
Because like you said, if you're clear on your destination, you stick with it long enough, the odds are you're going to continue getting higher and higher, you'll get there. Now, I think, again, what you said, our hope is that this resource gets you there faster and prevents the pitfalls, because the longer you take, the lower the odds that you end up getting there. It's kind of like the boat analogy we use often. The longer you spend at sea, the higher the chances you hit some sort of storm that like sinks your boat. So not to say that the rest of the strategy isn't important, but this is by far the highest, most important thing. And the other thing you said, as far as I don't know that method is maybe even the right way, but they are methods, but they're more like tests. Like, this is a thought I had, is like, you go to the doctor and you say, hey, I've got, I don't know, upper abdominal pain. When I eat, and they're like, oh, well, is it acid reflux? It could be this, it could be this. And they might prescribe several tests. Yep. Like, I'm going to run blood work. I'm going to have you do, not an MRI, but whatever, various, ultrasound to check this and that. And so what they're doing is they're trying to get different perspectives on the same problem or the same thing. And if those all agree, then you raise the level of confidence that you've actually found it. So that's how I see these. One of them you might be.
Well, and two, I think that's a great illustration because different tests, getting back to your medical illustration, different tests have different strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, that's well said.
And that's the same thing here, too. Some of these methods have different strengths and weaknesses. So what I was going to say, too, and I kind of forgot to say this, but it's worth, even if you get through one or two of these and you feel really confident, like, yep, this is the destination, it might still be worth doing all of them or another one, 3 or 4 of them. Because you're like you were saying, you're going to get different angles and you're going to get different, because there's different strengths, you're going to come out with different information about your destination.
That's well said. Yeah. And it's going to increase your confidence, and having I would say the second most important thing with having a good destination is being confident in the destination.
That it's the right destination.
Exactly.
That's my number one pitfall. I can tell you is I'm like, I select where I want to head, and then it changes, or I'm like, well, do I really want to go that far?
That's right. That's right.
It's constant, man. And
for me, it's like, I know that's what I want. Or no, it's like, I think that's what I want, but to try it, I'm going to have to work really hard and sacrifice a lot. And what if I do that and then I was wrong, you know? So when I am confident, I'm willing to take those steps and make those sacrifices.
And we'll get into this later on in the book, but we've got a lot of sections, I know, because I remember writing these in the outline, but about how important it is, your why. Why do I want to accomplish this thing? And a lot of that why is your ability to picture yourself at your destination, and that's how like that rings, I almost say in your soul, like, because it is a very soul, it's an inside of you kind of thing. So if you have a really clear destination, and then step 2, so to speak, is like picturing yourself there. And, if I take the example of losing weight, imagining yourself, 30 pounds lighter and fit and maybe washboard abs, and you imagine your wife like being more attracted to you, or you imagine getting a girlfriend, or you know what I'm saying?
All the energy you're going to have.
Yeah, the energy. Yeah, there's so many things. You imagine running around with your kids and they get tired instead of you, Imagine going to the gym and not feeling ashamed of yourself. So those kinds of things, being able to envision that, those things then feed back into your motivation, which just helps you even get farther down the road.
So let's jump in. The other thing I was going to say before we hit the first one is, you talked about taking a lot of time. A lot of these don't take a lot of time. You could probably move through them, in 30 minutes to an hour. But what they do need is they need marinate time. Like,
good point.
Pretty much all of them, what I would recommend is to, and I'm sure we'll hit these, I'll hit this same point a few times as we move through it, but like, you need to do the exercise, walk through the process, and then walk away from it, and then come back to it a day later, and then a week later, and see, do those answers still hit and land in the same way they did in that moment when you did it, and you'll see how that kind of fleshes itself out, but it's almost just as important, if not more important, than the time you actually spend answering the questions. So
it's just thinking about it, or you're saying like fill it all out, but then kind of just let it sit. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because a lot of these questions are, you'll see as we get into it, they very much, it's like what you were talking about, how the goal lands on your soul, or how it resonates with you is how I like to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so resonance, it could resonate with me in this moment, but what about the next day? What about the next day? What about a month from now? What about a year from now? Will it still resonate with me? And the only way to know that is to sort of put it to the test by waiting a week or a few days, or sometimes even a month. So
yeah, and I'll add to that too, because this is another trap that I tend to fall in, is when I'm going through these exercises, I take too long doing them initially because I want to have the perfect answer to all the questions the first time around. Yeah. And I think it's actually better to go through it and more do your gut reaction. And you might be wrong in that moment, but that's okay. It's better to get through it. And then, like you're saying, let it sit and marinate for a while and then come back to it. Well, okay, that wasn't really accurate.
That's right. That's right.
But 9 times out of 10, I mean, this is how I am. 9 times out of 10, my gut reaction is more true than my like 2 weeks of, thinking and agonizing over something.
That's right. But what the marination period does is it's sort of a cooling off period. It's like you might think, like, this has happened to me when I did one of these exercises I did probably, 10 years ago. And there was probably 80% of it stuck through the marination period, but there was a few pieces where I was really excited about them in that moment. And then about 2 weeks later, I read back over it and I was like, I don't really resonate with that anymore. So something about that moment, whatever emotional state or whatever things were happening around me, whatever experiences I was having in that moment led that to resonate. And so coming at it from a different time or a different season, a different location even, sort of helps me. Again, it's all about changing perspective and doing different tests.
Yeah.
So.
And the goal of this is such a long-term destination that if those kinds of things that you just mentioned, which I think that's a great example, like maybe you just read a good book on something.
Yes.
And you're all hyped about whatever.
That's
I
right.
just finished a book on Never Split the Difference. It's on negotiation.
Yeah, negotiating.
Yeah. So for like 2 weeks, I was just totally hyped on negotiation and I was seeing it everywhere. You know what I mean? And I was like talking to my wife, like, I'm going to negotiate my way out of this, that kind of thing. I'm exaggerating. That didn't really happen.
No, I know what you mean.
But
I know what you mean.
Yeah. So you might have just read a really great book or you just watched a really insightful documentary and some of that's bleeding into your thinking, but the goal of this isn't for those kinds of things. And I think that's what you were alluding to. So I just wanted to clarify that. The goal of this is, no, this thing might be your destination for 10 years. It might be your destination, if you're doing this on a personal level, this might be your destination for the rest of your life. So this is not something that you want those, as great as they may be, you don't want those like temporary highs affecting how you think about these things.
Yeah, you want to filter those out. Those are not helpful in this process.
Exactly.
All right, man. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm excited for this.
I just got really excited. I don't know why, but I love this kind of stuff.
Yeah, man. So these are methods that I have sort of pieced together. I think I wrote most of this. So I'm actually very curious to test it out on you because I know we just got done in our last session talking all about how you've tried some of this and it hasn't worked well. So I'm very curious to see. I'm
not sure how much of this I've actually tried. And also, I know that at various times we've talked about these, but we've never really dug into them. Hence, our whole series is called the Let's Right.
Yeah.
Because we want to take these things, whether they're my stuff or your stuff, and we want to subject them to discussion and rigorous testing.
Good. And I want to say, I'll try to credit if I remember exactly where something came from. I'll try to point to it, but a lot of this has been so many years of piecing it together that I won't remember. So
yeah.
All right, let's do the first one because I think this is the most obvious one that people will think of. This is probably, if you've ever done this exercise before, this is probably what you've done or something like this under this category. And I did my best to sort of break them, almost categorize them into, like I said, categories. And a little repetitive there, but but I don't know that these names are the best names, but I just there were sort of mental markers for me to know. Oh yeah, that's the one. All right, so the first one again, and this is the most common one, is what I call the blank canvas method.
Yep.
Which basically is, imagine an artist sitting down in front of a blank canvas or a writer sitting down in front of a blank sheet of paper and just writing and just saying, okay, what do I want to make? And then I'm gonna just sit down and paint that picture. So it assumes that you can sort of visualize or that you have a certain sense of what you're after. So you can already sense the potential downside of that is if so many of us are out of touch, like you and I just said we were in our last few sessions, with what we truly want or our true destination, then this can be a challenge. But for many of us, maybe we have at least a general sense. So with this, usually what it ends up with is some brainstorming questions. Imagine, throwing words up at the wall and seeing what sticks and piecing it together. That's very much how these methods sort of work. And you could probably find a lot of these, online if you Google, a phrase like vision exercise, that kind of thing. But I've picked a few questions here that I have both seen it been the most effective for me personally, but also I've seen helpful in other people. So a couple, maybe I'll just walk through some of these and sort of pause, because what the two things I want to show on each of these methods is, number one, what it is, and then number two, why it works. Like what's behind Sort of like almost like pharmacology, like you take a pill and you might know, oh, this is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. But then knowing why it works on your body the way it does is also a helpful thing. So, okay. So for the first one,
before we jump in, I do have a question. Like, if you've done a lot for this one, and maybe it doesn't apply to this one, but other ones, like I was saying in our last session, I've done like the sort of vision. What do they call it? Vision lining, I think that's what they called it. Okay. Instead of timeline, it's a vision line. if you get that, yeah. Where I've sat down, I'm like, okay, in this many years, I want to accomplish this, and in this many, months or whatever, I want to accomplish this. If you've done some of that work, is it helpful to start with that and like kind of put it in here, or is it better to just throw that all out, start fresh? Yeah. You know what I mean? Because it does say blank canvas, so I kind of get a sense of that. But at the same time, if you've, like you mentioned, I think a lot of people will have answered some of these questions, if not all of them, at some point or another.
Yeah. So I have two thoughts on that. One is, I think my inclination personally, and even when I walk people through this kind of thing, because I've done some of that, is to start from scratch. And the reason why is, if something is truly deep inside you in the way that we are hoping, in the way that we're trying to expose, you shouldn't need to look at your notes. Like, you shouldn't need, you should land at the same place multiple times. Yeah. If it's truly there. That's number one. And then number two, there are other methods down the line that actually do more of what you're talking about, where they will look in your past and sort of take that into account. Yeah. And so that's where I would see more of an opportunity to look backwards and see what you've done in the past, notes you've taken in the past, that kind of a thing. Does that help?
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay. So the first one that again, these are sort of cherry picked from various sources, so I apologize if, I can't remember most of these as I'm looking over them, but the first one talks about what do I want to struggle for? Oh, and by the way, a lot of these can be applied both in your personal life and for like a team or an organization. So some of them will say we, or the organization, or I, or my life, or whatever. You can kind of flip flop them, but what do I want to struggle for? What will we embrace struggling for? And then in which areas does the struggle not matter? So that's a great way. Basically, it's sort of using the cost of something to say, as a litmus test, to say, how much do I really care about this thing? Like, if this was going to cost me everything, would I still go for it? Or how much would I be willing to sacrifice? Maybe is another way to say that. And then the what on the other end of that, the thing you're actually pursuing, gives you a really helpful hint or clue at the thing you care about, at what potentially is your desired future. So I think maybe one of the analogies that I've used, and I'll try to walk through some of these in different analogies, but examples, is a friend of mine started a nonprofit to basically sort of not overhaul, but support the foster care system in his area, his community. And so, that was sort of his end destination was, and he has it way more specifically written out, but imagine if you're setting out on that journey, you might look and say, well, what are the most important things to us? What are we willing to sacrifice for? Is that, is making the foster care system in our county, in our community, to this level, making it way better, or improving it in these specific ways, or would we sacrifice for that? How much would we sacrifice? Yeah. So that would get you, down the road a little bit.
Yep. And that's a good example too, because I don't think at the time when he founded his nonprofit, I'm pretty sure he wasn't sure yet what that was going to look like, right? Like, it was a more general idea of, we want to support the foster care, system. We want it to be better. We want to help the kids in it. Well, that could be a lot of different things, right?
Yeah.
So, and go ahead.
And there's things around it. Like, there's licensing new foster parents. There's one of the primary thing he started on was kind of a transition house where kids would, when they're first coming into foster care, there's like 3 days that the local government has before they can place, or in order to place them with a family, but there wasn't a place for them to stay for those 3 days. So where they started was to buy a home and basically have it staffed with volunteers, trained, qualified volunteers. And so anyway, there's various sort of problems that he could have tackled, but which one do you start with, and what's the end goal, all that. So that's kind of what we're trying to expose here.
But the point of this is to say, what are you willing to work for? What's the hill you're willing to die on?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Because when push comes to shove.
Yeah.
Not that it would be nice, not that it makes you feel good, but that you're actually willing to write the check, spend the money, take the hit feel the pain, all that stuff.
Yeah. Fail again, over and over again. Spend the money is a big one. Put your energy to, because energy is something you can't ever get back, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you lose a project, which can happen. You get down the way on something and realize it's not going to work, or maybe you created a new product and nobody likes it.
Yeah.
But you go back to that. What am I really trying? What am I really struggling for here? This is going to sound weird, but I do think like a lot of times, we see all these studies of people not being happy at their jobs, and I think that's a huge reason why is. And I've had those moments myself where you're staring at the screen, answering email or whatever you're doing. And you're like, what am I even struggling for? Because work, especially work, can be a struggle, whether it's struggling with, relationships, people, coworkers, whether it's struggling. This is how I feel it a lot, is just trying to push a project forward, all the energy it takes. Because, I don't know, it feels this way to me, is that a lot of times, I mean, it's sort of like everybody's got their own thing that they're trying to push forward, and nobody really cares about your thing. So if you aren't the one sort of pushing it forward, shepherding it forward, it just dies like on the operating table. You know what I mean? I feel that way a lot. So but to have answered this question and to know, what am I really struggling here for? Well, not this project, obviously, but what is this project going to really accomplish that helps, move this mission forward or get to this destination?
Yes.
Then those times, those moments, which happen probably more than we'd like to admit.
When they come, right?
When they come, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
Will you be able to push through? Yeah, that's a great point. So that's sort of the negative approach, is to say it's almost
this
like saying
what
would I spend?
Yeah.
The one number two. So this is all very raw. This is almost in like brainstorm format.
Okay.
So I probably would turn number one that is listed right now. What do I want to struggle for? I would probably make that number two and move number two as it stands right now up to number one, because number one is actually the positive way of asking that a similar question, which basically is the classic sort of, how is the world going to be different because we exist, or because if it's a personal thing, how do I want the world to be different because I've been born, because I was born and lived my life? Like, what should be different?
But I mean, what is the benefit of starting with positive or starting with negative just because you feel better about it?
I'll tell you, not necessarily. The way I would see it happening, and I guess you could go, whatever resonates with people, they can take that approach. But the way I would see it is sort of, I would take number one, I would list out several examples, like maybe try to drive for a high number like 7 or 10 or something like that. And then test all of those on number two and say, okay, I just made a list of 10 things that I would love to be different about the world. But then I would ask for each one, would I die on that hill?
Yeah.
Would I die on that hill?
Yeah.
Would I die on that? And for most of them, the answer is going to be no.
Yep. It's very easy to say, I want to cure cancer, or I want to, name a disease. But then when you actually say, okay, well, if I spent my whole life and never actually achieved it, would I be okay with that? Which maybe that's a different question, but I feel like it's not, because there's never a guarantee that you'll reach your destination. So the point is, would I be okay pouring out everything that I have to accomplish this goal, whether I meet it or not? Like, really, right? That's right. It's like a cut and draw. Like, this is where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I think I like this way of asking it. What hill are you willing to die on? Because you hear that a lot of like, that's not a hill I'm willing to die on.
Yes.
And that's sort of, it's a good way of like ferreting out stuff that's not really that important.
Another way of saying that about the negative approach. And by the way, you could start with number two, because there might be things that you have a sort of a gut reaction about. And you're like, that's the thing. That's what I would die for, or I would die on that hill. But sometimes I like to have a sort of a brainstorm list to work from. But another example of the negative approach, and then I want to hit on number one a little bit more, the new number one.
Yes.
Is someone said, imagine you are, basically standing in front of a tightrope strung between two giant skyscrapers, hundreds of feet in the air. And you're like, you're not a tightrope walker, and there's no safety harness. And on the other side of the tightrope, I forget who told me this analogy. It might have been, anyway, put something on the other side of the tightrope, and what would you walk across that tightrope and risk your life for? What would you put over there? If it's your family and like you had to walk to save them? Well, yeah, I would do that. Or what if it was like money? Like, well, probably not,
Yeah.
What if it was name the thing, and you're like, okay, that's the thing.
Well, you would probably say, not that, oh, I wouldn't do it for money, but you would say how much money, right?
How much money? Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's even an amount of size and scale maybe that is coming to it as well. Like maybe you would say, oh, I want to accomplish, this thing. But then if you said, well, but if all if all it was, let's take the foster care, system, just because we already mentioned it. But, if all I ever helped was 100 kids, I don't think that'd be worth it. I wouldn't want to put my time in if it was just somebody else may not, though. I mean, obviously, parents take in, maybe 10, 12 kids over the course of their lives. I guess I don't really know the number, but.
Or adopting one child.
Exactly.
That could be the thing. And we're hitting on a topic that is one of the ones you and I think, get really excited about that most people don't talk about, which is the level of success. And that's actually a whole separate category that we're not even hitting on in this point. But that it does reveal a little bit of that.
But my point is, so you might come up with something that you really like, and then the negative approach, you're kind of like, well, no. But if it was scaled correctly, then you would be like, yeah, I would die to become a millionaire, let's say, not to
die, but I would risk my life.
Yeah, maybe risk your life is too strong. But my point is, like, I would be okay putting a lot more effort in. I mean, obviously, people do.
Yeah.
So the scale is a huge piece of that.
Yep. Okay, so that's the negative approach. As far as the positive approach, these are all pretty basic questions, and there's a lot more out there about, identifying your vision. And I don't know that any one is better than another. Again, figure out what resonates with you.
Well, let's frame this in a couple of ways. So, like, how would you frame that for an individual?
How would I frame that number one question?
And then we could do business. Yeah.
Yeah. So, a lot of the things we talked about, like, what would you be when you die? What do you hope? How do you hope the world will have been different? Or, like, I love this little question here. How will you save the world in your own little way? I think that's a great question. Like, you can't save the whole world. No one person can save the whole world. Yeah. But how will you save it in your own little way? How will you make it just a little bit better? And so I would say a lot of it comes down to, leaving a mark. How do you, when you walk, you could even take smaller examples. Like, when I'm a part of a team, how do I want that team to be impacted? When I have a relationship with someone, how do I want them to be impacted because I'm their friend? Those kinds of questions, I think. And I would start there. Then when it comes to teams and organizations, it's really a similar question. It's like, well, yeah, we need to make money or else we wouldn't have started this organization. But there's a lot of ways to make money. So this is another one that's great for organizations right there. It says, I lost it now. Oh, when we started, what did we want to see changed? But then how can our pursuit of that make a bigger difference? So, like, we talked about the shoe company. By the way, it's Tom's, isn't it? That gives shoes away.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yep.
So we talked about that a few episodes ago. And they basically, for every a pair of shoes someone buys, they donate a pair of shoes to, forget who or how they do it. But so they basically said, hey, we're obviously a company. We need to make money and, like, pay our employees and stuff. But our pursuit of that can actually make a bigger difference in the world. Or another one, like the Steve Jobs, make a dent in the universe. Like that. I want to come back to that one because I think that's a really interesting example of an end destination. But so those are just a couple of examples of, like, how I would see that happening for an organization versus for an individual. I don't know if that's clarifying at all or not.
Yeah, I think I feel like it's worth digging in a little bit more for an organization. Like, let's say you're a small business or even a big business, but I think small business is a good place to start because you're kind of like, well, I just want to survive, and that's probably not big enough, right? And you always hear that statistic that, I forget what the number is, like 90% of small businesses fail within the first year. And I think that's a big reason why is they're started for a lot of reasons, so many reasons, but a big part of it becomes just surviving, right? Like we just got to get to the next day. Like I just got to make payroll or, I just got to get the next big client or whatever it might be. And I think that really starts to take your, it starts to put blinders on you, right? To just like, it's like just looking down. That's like all you're doing is just looking at your feet to like the next step. And a lot of this is saying, no, like, let's get bigger than that and zoom out a little bit so you can see the whole path. And yeah, there's going to be times when you do just need to focus on whatever that next step is. But the point here is to say, no, there needs to be something more. Like if you're starting a small business, you can make it about providing for the people that you hire, being a stable place to work. You can make it about making your community better. There's so many things you can make it about other than just surviving, other than just we got to make payroll, other than just we got to hit X number of dollars in revenue this year, which I'm not saying those are bad things. They're just not things that get you out of the bed in the morning, I guess.
No,
maybe
that's
is
right.
what I'm saying.
And I would add two things to that. One is that I'll try to say them and then come back and explain what I mean. One is that your end destination, the bigger version of your end destination, besides just surviving as an organization, number one, it can drive and should drive your creativity. It should drive innovation. But then number two, it can also and will also, if it's done well, I don't know how to say this right, but it adds energy, it adds momentum, it adds resources. So for example, two examples. One is the innovation one. Google's stated objective, or they may have changed it since then, but it used to be nuts. I think it's something like
organize all the world's information.
Organize.
Yeah.
I was like, is it compile all the world's information? Yeah, organize all the world's information. So yeah, obviously they need to make payroll. Obviously they need to make, money for their stockholders. But in the end, that's what they're after, is to organize all the world's information. And as they set that out, as they drive their ship that direction, that causes them to, seeing that as a destination, causes them to do interesting things. Not just search, right? All sorts of research projects and coding and different things like that. So that's where it drives innovation. And then the flip side, the other point on that is, who is it? Simon Sinek, I think, who says people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So like the Tom's example, their destination it has to do with selling shoes and making money, but it also has to do with helping people who don't have shoes and helping people who can't afford to buy shoes.
There's a big part of business that is, people can go, there's so much competition in almost every niche nowadays. Yeah. That you almost have to have something more than just I'm competent at my job to like win business, no matter what business it is, right? And now what we're seeing is customers actually have a relationship with the business. And that's more than just a relationship with their sales rep, let's say, or their, the person they know at the company. It's an actual relationship with the business. Like, and the example I always use is Amazon. I never have talked to an Amazon employee before in my life, but I have a very strong relationship with that company. Like, I've been a Prime member since the beginning, since that started in 2011 or whatever. I was actually, I think, part of the beta testing of Prime. I spent probably thousands of dollars with them at this point. And all along the way, there's a give and a take that has happened, and it has led me to keep going, keep ordering with them a time and time again. And there's an actual relationship, there.
Yes. And that relationship means something to you.
Exactly. Yes. So you're really not just trying to earn customers. You're trying to earn repeat customers. You're trying to earn, rabid fans is another term that I hear thrown around a lot. But I think what you're hitting on is people who are passionate about working with you, because it's not just, I need, this thing. I need a plumber, or sometimes it is just that. But if you build a relationship with somebody, you're like, I'm always going to hire that person for when I have that issue, because I like them or I like their company. I feel like we're getting off track a little bit, but I think this is also really helpful.
No, we're not. Because I think what I think we're doing is we're saying, well, why would you pick one, as far as answering number one, why would you pick one thing over another? Because I think you might start out with some sort of vanilla, I want to make money, I want to pay my bills.
It would be easy to fill those in for this question.
Yes. And I don't know that that's very helpful. I don't know that that's going to inspire you, unless, this is going a little meta, but to get back to our other, we've had this conversation in the past a little bit, but the idea of layered strategies. So you have your business strategy, but then if you're like the example you said, you're, say, a small business owner, or you run your own consulting firm or whatever. You have your vision and goals and end destination for that organization. But the reason you started, the reason you became an entrepreneur is because you had vision for your own life. You wanted financial freedom, or you wanted to be your own boss, or whatever. You wanted to meet a need that you saw wasn't being met, So those can sort of layer inside of there. But then what you need to do is associate them with each other. So anyway,
I did want to take a second on individual.
Okay.
Only because this part, more than some of the other parts, feels a lot like the goal setting stuff that I've heard over and over again. So I wondered is this just the same as that? And that's okay, because there's more steps. Or do you see this being different from some of that other stuff? And part of it is like, I always, when people start to talk about, how would the world be different if I didn't exist? I always get this like weird feeling that's like, okay, I'm going to go like out in the woods and like hug a bunch of trees now,
Yeah.
It doesn't motivate me. Maybe some people it does. So I don't want to knock it if that's your thing, but
no, I think you're not wrong in that. I'll say two things about that. Number one, it sort of depends on the way you think. So for some people, you've never thought this way, and you need to sit down and sort of spend some time thinking about these questions. Like one of my favorite ways of asking it, I mentioned it a minute ago, is like, when you interact with someone, what do you want them to leave thinking about you? Or say you were friends with someone for 5 years and then you move away. Like, what should they feel about that move? Like, oh man, that dude was so whatever, or that girl was so whatever. Like there's some value in spending at least some time thinking about that. However, I think where there's declining value, and then where it does sort of drift into navel gazing a little bit and that's because there's a lot of common ground. I think a lot of people, like, there's however many billion people in the world right now. It's way past. It used to be 6 or 7, and now it's way past that. But like, there can only be so many reasons to live, and there's going to be a lot of people living for similar reasons, and that's okay. Like, don't feel like you have to be this like unique, every snowflake is different or whatever. Like, but at least spend some time. Like, I think there is some value there. And then I would agree with what you said at the end. Like, this is more just a starting ground. It's sort of like building the foundation. Yeah. And you're gonna look back at sort of the holistic picture that we're painting, and it'll have its sort of piece in the value. So
the other thing that I wanted to say, maybe we don't need to spend any time on this, but what if you're a younger person, and maybe you don't have good answers to this, like you don't have a lot of life experience yet, and so some of these, like, I don't know, or even like you're, let's say you're 17 and you're like, oh, I'm gonna be a musician on a major label, and that's how I'm gonna change the world. Chances are that's not gonna work out for you.
Yeah.
Just statistically speaking. What would you say to somebody, maybe in that sort of situation?
I would say this is probably not the best test for you.
Okay.
As we said when we started, certain tests are coming at it from different perspectives, and certain tests will reveal certain test results will work better for certain people in certain stages of life. And there's others tests, like there's one of these methods where I'm trying to find it exactly and I'm not seeing it, but there's one that basically talks about trying things out and experimenting and seeing. And that's where I would say, hey, if you're 17, 18, 19, you just graduated, or you're in college and you're like, man, I don't know, what is my thing? And like, one of the best things you can do is just try lots of different things that you've never tried before. And so I think that's in here somewhere. We'll hit in sort of a different method. But again, this is the blank canvas. You sit down, you're just this assumes it's all inside of you already. And it may not be, and that's okay. You know what I mean? So I think that's a good question. Okay, so we started with sort of the positive approach and the negative. Well, that's all for this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to hear the rest of this conversation, make sure to subscribe so you get new episodes as they're released. You can also view this content along with visuals on our YouTube channel. The link is in the show notes. We'll see you on the next one.